Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 55, A More Serious Avatar. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford, and today we're talking about the live-action version of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Now, this podcast is going to look at episodes 1 through 4, and next week's podcast will talk about episodes 5 through 8. How are you doing today, Mike?
I am doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And what's new in your writing world?
Continuing the trend, I'm working on the first draft of Zara 2, but next time I will definitely be done with the first draft. I only have a couple of chapters left to write, which will be done today. So that's very exciting for me.
That is exciting.
How about you? What's new in your writing world?
Same. I'm not working on Zara, obviously. I'm still working on Ecliptic. I actually went through and pulled out, I have, piles and piles of paper for notes that I've written down and things. I'm like, don't forget to do this. And I want to do that, and I finally went through all that paper because this is a 5-book series with a series arc that I'm implementing along with, character arcs. And I have all these different notes for different books in the series. So I actually spread out a whole bunch of flip charts in my office space and stuck sticky notes on each of the flip chart pages for each book, and then went through all the papers. I mean, it was like, a stack of paper 3 inches thick. So I went through and stuck it all in the right place for the right story. And then when I did that, I realized I had things that I had changed since I wrote the first book in the series. So I went back and edited the first book, the draft of the first book, to incorporate those changes. And so then started moving on. So I'm at the climax of the story. And
Excellent.
I just need to finish writing the climax and then the denouement. And the denouement's got all the thread tying up for this story that needs to happen. And it's a bunch of little scenes that I need to craft and then figure out how to weave them together in a very organic, natural way.
Wow, that's great. You're right there.
Thanks. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to try to be finished by next week. So hopefully you and I will come to next week's podcast recording with both of those books finished.
Wow. Yeah, sounds good. Let's do it.
And as a reminder to our listeners, you can read The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard as it's being written on Patreon and The Tales of Zara on Amazon in both the episodic format on Kindle Vella as well as an ebook and paperback. And those links are in the show notes. So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books, movies, or television?
So the only thing I have encountered in the last week is the thing we're going to discuss today, the Avatar live action series. That's been it. Do you have anything in addition to that?
Continuing to watch Halo, which comes out every week.
Cool.
Avatar, Netflix uploaded the live action series of Avatar: The Last Airbender in one fell swoop, so you can binge it if you choose. And Paramount Plus is releasing Halo one episode at a time every week. So we watch the Halo when it comes available, and then we're parsing out the Avatar to enjoy that. I also was watching Top Gun Maverick this weekend because I saw this really interesting YouTube video about postmodern movies and postmodern movie storytelling, and I believe what they called meta postmodern. Or meta, I don't remember. It was really good. I should remember more because it was a really great, interesting video. And so it made me want to go back and watch Maverick because the gentleman on this video was talking about Maverick and its storytelling and how the story was structured. So I went back and I was looking at it from a storyteller's point of view. And one of the things that really struck me, which I thought was fascinating, was that in the original Top Gun, Iceman served as an antagonist for Maverick. And in this, the second movie that came out, Iceman became sort of almost the wizard figure, right? Like in a fantasy story. He would perform magic that would save Maverick from whatever trouble Maverick had gotten into, right? You know, whenever Maverick was in trouble, Iceman performed his admiral magic and saved him. And then, like so many wizard mentors in so many stories did, he died. And then Maverick had to take on his last challenge by himself without the magic, which I thought was a really interesting change in this character.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Are you ready to talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender?
Yeah, let's go.
Today we're talking about the story told in the live-action version of Avatar: The Last Airbender, which has just recently premiered on Netflix. And I'm going to read to you the description of the show on the Netflix website. A young boy known as the Avatar must master the 4 elemental powers to save a world at war and fight a ruthless enemy bent on stopping him. So have you enjoyed the series thus far?
Yeah, I have been enjoying it. I know when you and I talked about it offline, we were debating how much to cover of the story, and we were worried if we didn't like it, we just stopped after an episode or two, how that would play out. But no, I'm enjoying it enough to want to continue and see the rest of the series. There's a lot of cool elements to it. There's definitely a lot of core storytelling that's obviously taken directly from the Last Airbender the original version of this show. One of the things I noticed that we didn't discuss when we talked about the animated series, which I saw here, it just came into my mind as I was watching. There's kind of this dual fish out of water or learning experience that the characters go through about the world that they're in. Even though all the characters are in this world, you have 2 different timelines that are sort of being represented. There's a current timeline where Aang is back and they're trying to restore his avatar power so he could fight off the Fire Nation. But for him, it's a whole new world. This isn't what the world was like when he was when he was a child and growing up. So he's sort of learning about this new world as they're going through it, and it's being explained by his friends and the companions and the other people that they meet in the different towns that they go to, which is kind of cool. He sort of he fulfills that viewpoint of the viewer, right? As we're learning, as Aang is learning as we're going through, but at the same time, he's also introducing his friends and the other people to his world, what he remembered and what it used to be and the previous states of things and what the world was like then, and presenting them with hope and what they can strive for. So we're also seeing that from their perspective as they're learning about his old world and kind of what they would hope the world would become again. So anyway, long little story there about just an interesting way of doing it, because there's often in stories, there's this character who is the fish out of water, who helps the story get conveyed to the viewer or the reader when they don't know anything about this world. And I just thought it was interesting that we get sort of 2 of those types of things, 2 of those different points of view in this story. And it was in the original series as well. So I thought that was neat.
That's a great observation.
Yeah. It's kind of weird, right? I didn't recognize that the first time. But yeah, I'm enjoying it. I feel like there's a lot of good Avatar-iness to the show. I'm definitely going to rely on you to point out more maybe specifics and details or areas where it changed that you noticed, because it's been, probably almost a decade since I saw the original show.
Yeah.
So a lot of the things that are happening, I'm like, okay, this seems familiar to me, but I'm not sure if that's just because we had just talked about the show and it's like anything that happens now in my mind happened in the original series, or if I'm remembering, oh yeah, that sequence did actually happen. But I'm enjoying it. I feel like there's still a lot of the the good storytelling elements in terms of the themes that were in the original, which is one of the things that I had mentioned that they would still have in this, which I feel like they do. I feel like they're still working on, the thing that you had mentioned, which is the heart. I feel like they're at least trying to get that there. And it's still early on in the series for me. I've only seen 3 or 4 episodes. So I hope that continues and we really get to feel for these characters as the story progresses. I feel like from that perspective, both of those things are off to a great start, which gives me a lot of hope for continuing this show. But yeah, so I'm going to pass it off to you because I think you probably will have more to say on this. But let's start with, what did you like about it? Are you enjoying it? And what are the things that you enjoy?
I am enjoying it. I actually appreciate, we are talking about a live action series that's going to be, the first season is going to be a total of 8 episodes. And so I don't even know how many episodes were in the animated series, but there probably were like 20, right? Because it was a half an hour show, the animated series. And,
yeah,
I think just the whole construct of animation and putting together an animated series is very different than live action. And so I think there's a reason that there's only 8 episodes, about an hour long, and they are, by necessity, compressing a lot of story into those 8 episodes. And I actually think they're doing a pretty good job of that. I really, actually, the first episode, and we have a spoiler warning at the beginning of each podcast episode. I'm going to put a spoiler warning in the description too, just in case somebody finds this and, doesn't realize it's going to have spoilers. And I'm going to say it one more time. Spoilers are happening now. The first episode, one of the things we see almost in the very beginning is the destruction of the air temple. And I thought that was a terrific creative choice because it really set the framework for what the stakes are and what's happening and how serious everything is. The animated series was for kids. And even though it had adult themes and adult ideas presented in a very sort of gentle way, this is much more grown up. This is like the grown-ups Avatar. And I think it's really good that they showed us how scary and traumatic and horrible the behavior of the Fire Nation was when they attacked the other nations. And I really appreciated that. I thought it was exciting. I thought it was a really good storytelling choice to do that. I also think how, like I said, they're squeezing stuff together. And in this last episode, and you and I have both seen episodes 1 through 4, this last episode, we're in Omashu, which is an earthbender kingdom. And we're discovering Boomy, who is a fun character that, is appreciated from the animated series. But they also squeezed in a couple other things that were from different episodes in the animated series, like the segment with Jet, who is what he calls himself a freedom fighter. But you get to learn that there are different ways of fighting in a war. Like Aang's way of fighting is helping people with the goal of stopping the Fire Nation. And he's struggling with, and you're seeing this in the live action series, you're already seeing his struggle with, I want to help people, I don't want to engage in violence, yet I have to stop this war. How do I stop this war without engaging in violence? And then you have the comparison with Jet, who is a character who is all about violence. And he doesn't care who gets hurt if he can deal a blow to the Fire Nation. So it was a great contrast, and I like how they put him in Omashu. I thought that was well done. If you're you have to bring Jet in. I think Jet's an important character because he does show that contrast of fighting. As Katara said, Jet's not fighting for love; he's fighting out of hatred. And I thought that was a really terrific contrast to show how the Avatar is fighting out of love and Jet's fighting out of hatred. So I think it was a good character for that contrast. Also, Jet later in the series, spoiler alert again, provides an opportunity to see how redemption can take place. So he serves a really good purpose in the series. So I'm glad they pulled him in. They also pulled in Sai and Teo, who come from a different episode or series of episodes and they put them in Omashu as well. And I also thought that was well done. So I thought the way they wove all these elements in was just really well done. Also, General Iroh, Uncle Iroh, being captured by the Earthbenders and then being rescued by Zuko. I think that's even another episode. So they put all this stuff in and wove it in really well. I actually think episode 4 was almost the best of the first 4 so far. I thought it was very enjoyable. A couple things I have not really enjoyed is that I think they've spent too much time on certain things and not enough time on others. And I don't know whether it's really, I'll be interested in, after I get to the end of this comment, whether you think this is a storytelling issue or whether you think this is a medium issue, that is the television and live action versus animated series. I'll give you an example. We had in this last episode a scene where Uncle Iroh has been captured. He's being taken to a prison camp, and a prison guard is bullying him because the prison guard is unhappy about having lost somebody important to him. And he's furious and he's angry, and he wants to take it out on Iroh. And I felt like that scene went on for way too long. We get it. I mean, it's been presented over and over and over again. Firebender's bad. Everyone else is mad. We've seen that over and over again for the first 3 episodes. We don't need it again. That could have been a very simple, he said, "You want anything?" And Iroh says, "No, thank you." He hits him, and then he leans in and he says, "I lost my brother at Ba Sing, during your siege of Ba Sing Se. You know nothing of loss. You know nothing of humanity." Period. Done. 10 seconds. We get the point. And then we could have moved on to what I think was an excellent scene, which was his grieving at the coffin of his son who died at Ba Sing Se.
Oh yeah, that was great.
It was a beautiful scene. I thought it was incredibly well done. We, the viewer, will know something that the soldier doesn't know, that then gets us invested in this character even more and shows how complex the relationships are. But that scene with the soldier went on, 5 minutes? It was just too much. And I think there's several occasions of that where they're spending too much time telling instead of showing. I think more time on showing us how bad the firebenders are and less time on the relationships, which I think I would like to see. As a writer, I would like to see that reversed. Spend more time on the relationships, less time on how bad the Fire Nation is. We get it. I mean, that's pretty much established from the get-go when they destroyed the air temple. We know.
Yeah.
So I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of the relationship building. And I think there was just sort of this assumption that we understand the relationships or that we know the relationship's going to happen because we're fans of the story. But when you step back and look at it, I would like to have seen just more time spent with Katara and Aang and Sokka developing that relationship. Because when Sokka and Katara leave with Aang, it's not because of a relationship. It's because he's the Avatar.
Yeah.
We didn't really get much of an opportunity to see that relationship develop. It just sort of happened. And I would have liked to have seen a little bit more time developing. That being said, it's just not that big a deal because I am invested in these characters already because of the animated series. So I'm willing to stick it through and just go with it. I would have to say Sokka is like the best. He seems to be the most well-defined, well-developed of all the characters. Katara doesn't seem to be as well-developed, and frankly, neither is Aang. Though Aang has wonderful, I think the kid that's playing Aang is brilliant. He's so earnest. He's so wise. You could see the wisdom of the Avatar coming through him, but he's doing a lot of saying and not a lot of showing. Those are some of my initial thoughts.
No, those are good insights. I didn't think about the thing with Iroh. I didn't mind the build-up with Iroh where he was held captive, but maybe it's just because I knew what they were setting up.
Yeah.
Where, we get the flashback scene, which, like you said, that was just such a great scene.
Yeah.
But you're right, that could have been shorter and had exactly the same effect. I think that was a good analysis there. And I also like that they're combining elements from other episodes of the animated series that were maybe like, they almost felt like side episodes with some of the side characters, like with Jet.
Yeah.
and bringing that character in and showing the sort of opposite viewpoint effect in the same episode. I thought that was really well done. I remember when he showed up. When he showed up in the live action version, I was thinking like, wait, was he here in this like episode? Like I didn't remember that. So you saying it, yeah, okay, it makes sense that he was in his own episode, or at least a different episode. But that's good. I'm glad they're doing that without just cutting some of those characters out, which they could do, right? You have to trim a lot when you're shrinking it down. But I'm glad they're saving those, and I think now that you've mentioned that they did it, they're doing a great job of weaving those.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, even like the Bohemian Singer Band, that was delightful.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that they are funny and slightly annoying, and that was pulled off beautifefully.
Yeah,
and it didn't take.
And then his line at the end.
Yeah,
his line at the end when they're just like, "Oh yeah, they're doomed." That was great. They even got the cabbages guy in there. although when he first, like, the cabbages get destroyed, they get burned up, and he's like, "My cabbages!" He yells. I'm like, if you hadn't seen the animated series, that would have seemed like a really weird scene right there. Like, why is he doing this? But it was fun. I liked that. I loved how they had a little ride along the transport system in the Earth Kingdom. As soon as I saw that city, like, that was the first thing that came to mind for me. It was like, oh, they get to ride along on the transport. That was fun. Yeah, I remember. Well, for me, if we're talking about things I would improve, I don't know how I would improve this, but I would say the story feels a little bit choppy to me. Like they're kind of bouncing from one place to the next. That's kind of the nature of the show. I mean, it felt that way in the original series as well, like in the animated series. But I guess I went along with it a little bit more there because it's kind of a normal cartoony thing to do. It's like, okay, now we're on this island and we're going to talk to these people. We're in this village. We're going to talk to these people. Here, like live action, it just feels a little bit choppy. It's not bad. I think they do a pretty good job taking us from one place to the next still. But it's just something I noticed a little bit more this time. And maybe it's also because they're skipping some stuff too.
They may actually have a bit of a problem here as far as like a little sort of plot conundrum that they're trying to figure out how to work through. If memory serves, in the animated series, one of the reasons they were bouncing around is because Aang was still reluctant to take on the responsibilities of the Avatar. So, like, when they went to Kyoshi Island, he was looking to ride some fish. It was this sort of weird deviation from going up to the Northern Water Tribe to go ride this fish instead.
Yeah.
He was all about play. Like when he first met Katara and Sokka, he was wanting to ride the penguins.
Yes.
Right down the snow hill, like they were sleds. So he was a lot about play, and so there was sort of this avoidance tactics that he was doing that I think contributed to this bouncing around. But with this live action episode version, because they have been so pointed in showing the damage and showing the loss and showing how hard it is, it's very hard, I think, for Aang to just sort of turn a blind eye as a live action person. Whereas an animated character, I think, can get away with it more. I don't know. I'm just sort of talking off the top of my head, and maybe this doesn't make sense.
No, I see what you're saying.
I sort of feel like,
I think also probably from a writing perspective, they probably wanted him to be more agentive and give the show, more of a push and a drive, because in 8 episodes you don't have time to really languish. Yeah. The other thing go ahead.
I think that's what's leading to the choppiness, and I'm not sure how they might fix that, because the stories that were told in the first season in the animated version were stemmed from this reluctance on his part, and so you want to hang on to those elements because they play out in the end. But how do you do that while removing the reluctance? And I like what you said about them wanting to give him more agency. I just don't know how you would fix that.
Yeah. No, it could be part of the issue. But I mean, I think overall it's working pretty well for me.
Yeah.
Another thing is, I read an interview with the producers of the show, and anyone who's watched the animated series, right, and then you watch this, in the first episode, you're like, wow, this tone's a lot darker than the kids show. Right off the bat, people are getting killed horrifically. And the producers said when they looked at the series as a whole, they realized the show gets a lot darker toward the end.
Yes.
And they realized when they bring this to live action, they can't really avoid that tone. Like, it's like you're dealing with real people, and the visual effects, everything's going to seem so alive. So they intentionally, right off the start, wanted to make it feel darker, because they didn't want to promise a fun, lighthearted style at the beginning, only for the show to drastically change and become darker, more serious at the end. They felt the tonal shift wouldn't feel right when you saw it in live action, and they didn't want unaware audiences, people who hadn't seen the animated series, to get invested, only to be potentially turned off in the middle of the show when all of a sudden it did take that darker tone. So I can understand that, and it's probably the right decision, and that's probably why it's, Aang is a little less silly at the start and takes his responsibility a little more seriously. They wanted to get right into that, in addition to, having less time to tell the story. So I guess all that makes sense.
Yeah.
But overall, yes, I'm liking it.
Yeah, me too. And as a writer, what do you take away from this story so far?
I think my biggest thing is what you're always mentioning, which is that the characters are key. You really have to get the audience invested in who your characters are, your protagonists, and in this case, specifically, so much so, the villain, right? The antagonist, with Zuko trying to hunt them down. And then, of course, we know where this is going. But they do such a good job of setting it up. And I think it's so important to have motivations for both sides, rather than it just being a one-sided story. So that would be my biggest takeaway. Do you have a takeaway?
Sure. I'm trying to think if I have a takeaway.
Thinking about it? Yeah. It's hard because we just talked about the animated series.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have one yet. I like what they're doing. I guess for the moment, I'm focused on how they have converted this animated series into the live action. And so that's sort of where I'm processing. But let me take a step back and think about the storytelling as a whole. I agree with you about the characters. I think, like I said, this fourth episode was probably the best so far, because I think it did such a wonderful job of weaving the characters and their motivations and their actions in such a way that you could really see the contrasts among them and get a real feel for who they are and who they're going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and say, echo your takeaway, that using the characters and using who the characters are so intricately woven into the storytelling really makes for a good story.
Okay, good. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
When we discussed the animated series and we talked about what are some things that we wanted to see in the live action version, I think if I remember right, the one thing you said was you hoped it would still deliver on the heart of the animated show. Yes. Do you feel that it's doing that, at least in these few episodes?
Not as much as I hoped, however. I believe that the portrayal of Aang is so well done, and he is the heart of the story, and he does have heart, and I do feel heart, attached to him, and I want to see him succeed. So it is not, but you know what? I will also say this. I was not as impacted with the heart of the animated series until well into the series. And it wasn't until probably the end of the first book, the first book is Water, that I was really invested. So I think there's time. If I'm looking for like when I got invested in the animated series versus when I'm getting really invested in the live action series, I'm about at the same place, I think.
Yeah, I feel similarly. I feel like they're setting it up well. It's clearly there. The story elements that they're laying out are setting us up for what's to come. And it seems, 4 episodes in, it seems like they're taking it seriously and they're following along, and they want to deliver that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in episodes 1 through 4 of the new live-action Avatar: The Last Airbender. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We are so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the story told in episodes 5 through 8 of the live-action version of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of the show and talking about it next week.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.